John Marrant. John Marrant is known for being one of the first African American preachers and missionaries. Marrant was born a free man June 15, 1755, in New York City, but soon moved to Charleston, South Carolina, following the death of his father. By the age of 11, he was able to read, spell, play the French horn, and violin. At the age of 13, Marrant ran away due to his family not agreeing with him converting. He waited in the wilderness, relying on God to feed and protect him. Later on, Marrant was found by Cherokee hunters, where he was then taken to a Cherokee town. Initially, they sentenced him to death, but surprisingly, Marrant was spared. Marrant remained with the Cherokees for 2 years before returning to Charleston, but unfortunately, his family did not recognize him. Marrant conducted missionary work with slaves until the start of the American Revolutionary War. Marrant claimed that he was impressed into the Royal Navy for 6 years before being discharged in 1782. According to official records, there does not show any signs of him being in the Navy. In 1782, Marrant began training as a Methodist minister with Huntington's Connection, where he is shown on the New York City inspection roll of Negroes as the owner of Migla Marrant and 2 children. It is known that these individuals were his family members. Marrant was ordered in 1785 to minister for several thousand African Americans who had fled north during the fighting move to Boston, Massachusetts. Marrant wrote 3 books about his early life as well as his life as a preacher. In 1785, he published a narrative titled The Lord's Wonderful Dealings with John Marrant. This memoir proved to be very popular, going to 17 editions, although Marrant did not receive much financial benefit from it due to not all of the printings being authorized. Marrant delivered a sermon in 1789, which was called Noting the Equality of Men Before God. His final publication was in 1790, titled Journal Books, a narrative of the Lord's wonderful dealings with John Marrant, a black. Marrant moved to Boston in 1787 before briefly returning to Nova Scotia in 1788, where he then married Elizabeth Henry. In 1788, Marrant became the chaplain of the African Masonic Lodge in Boston, which was an active group in the movement to help abolish slavery. In 1790, Marrant traveled to London, where he then died in the suburbs of Islington.
Like many who find faith in a higher being, John Marrant came about it in a very unconventional manner. As he himself detailed in a narrative of the Lord's wonderful dealings with John Marrant, while he was 13 years old in Charleston, South Carolina, he first encountered the enthusiastic preaching of George Whitefield, who was a Methodist preacher, and he was active in the South during the Great Awakening. A prominent African Equiano described his encounter with Reverend Whitefield in his memoirs as such: I saw this pious man exhorting the people with the greatest fervor and earnestness, and sweating as much as I ever did while in slavery on Monostar Beach. I was very struck and impressed with this, and I thought it strange I had never seen divines exert themselves in the manner before, and was no longer at a loss to account for the thin congregation they preached to.
Marrant's narrative and his self-authored journal demonstrate that the subtly radical black evangelical set out in his ministry to address and encourage social and spiritual equality among black people and British Americans. The factional strife that preoccupied other ministers did not concern him. Instead, he attempted to bridge division between and among Methodists and other Christians. Abandoning scholasticism was in the end crucial to his efforts to transform Calvinist tradition. His ultimate goal, however, was to develop a Christian ministry and theology that would address the particular social and spiritual circumstances of Black people living in post-revolutionary North America. He deftly developed his sophisticated knowledge and British American Calvinist tradition to convince slave owners and his benefactors that such a ministry was both warranted and practical. Although his knowledge and use of Orthodox Calvinism was the means by which he was able to secure initial funding for his ministry, it was a progressive Calvinism he taught to his congregations. The discourse of his ministry is rooted in the discourse of freedom and egalitarianism that the Black revolutionaries and Black loyalists shared with one another. As a veteran loyalist who fought in the Revolutionary War, who then returned to North America to preach to loyalist immigrants and become chaplain of African Lodge 459 in Boston, Marrant reveals a faith that Christian communities, particularly among Black people, far outweighed the nationalist and sectarian interests of his day. His narrative illustrates the roots of Black theology that encourage and progressive social actions in both principle and practice. With these progressive religious roots, the principles he promoted would flourish in African American culture and yield fruit in some parts of virtually every major religious and often secular Black institutions developed since.
John Marrant's career is not important for the accomplishments he had, but rather his influence on historical and literal trends among African Americans. His message of perseverance, a testimony to the success of a Black man and a Christian could achieve through faith in God and within himself. His narrative served as a model for generations of Black American writers. In 1787, Marrant traveled to Boston, where he joined the first Black Masonic Lodge, founded by Prince Hall in 1784. He became chaplain to the lodge, and several of his Boston sermons were published in both England and America. He did not lose contact with his Nova Scotian flock. He returned to the province to marry Black loyalist Elizabeth Harris at Birchtown on August 15, 1788. In 1789, he believed his mission was accomplished, and he left for England. He continued his ministry at the main Huntingdonian Chapel in Islington, and when he died, he was buried in the churchyard.
Trouble the water. See that band all dressed in white. God's gonna trouble the water. The leader looks like the Israelite. God's gonna trouble the water. Ooh, wade in the water. Oh, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God is gonna trouble. God's gonna